Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and welcome everybody to today. I'm very excited. I'll be particularly excited at 4 o'clock, but I am very, very excited to have you all here today and to all of you online. So as Anne-Marie said, our mission is bold. We do want to rewrite the narrative around learning. We do want to build a society that values learning and how it can transform lives and livelihoods. So, very modest we are in our approach. But how do we do this? And you'll hear today how the science of learning plays a really important role in building our understanding of how people learn and the factors that affect learning. But the challenge really comes when we go to move this into the real world. And really, the research means nothing unless we can apply it into the real world. So we have been looking at over the past few years, what are the barriers that prevent research from moving into the real world? What are the challenges that we face that we need to be strategic about and try to overcome if we're going to have a positive impact on teaching, learning and training? So I want to share a couple of those barriers with you today. The first one I want to talk about is context. Often research is conducted in highly controlled environments, very far removed from the reality of the real world in which they are applied. And this can be challenging in terms of the fidelity of the findings as we move them across into the real world. So a Year 9 classroom on a Thursday afternoon is very, very different to a psychology lab or an fMRI machine. But the other challenge that this poses for us is that quite often our practitioners, our educators, those who are putting this research into practice, recognise that it is so removed from their context that it creates a sense of cynicism or disbelief that what the research is saying is great, but it doesn't apply to them. So we need to work out how do we break that down? How do we make research have an application in context? One of the ways we have learnt to address this particular barrier is through, I'm changing over to this clicker, I don't like that button, is through establishing industry identified questions and problems of practice. We start with the question from industry. We start with the question from our schools. This is what drives our research questions. This is what drives our research focus. We don't start from the research, we start from what is the real world need. Another innovative way in which we at the Science of Learning can address this challenge around context is that we can conduct research in the real world with portable and wearable technologies such as biometric wristbands and heart rate monitors and eye tracking devices, portable EEGs. And this afternoon you'll hear from Dr. Chase Sherwell, who'll be talking about a very exciting project he is doing with Mater Education, using these sorts of technologies and capturing real data, real time, in real contexts. Another important barrier that affects not just educational context, but all of our industry contexts as well, is access. Those of you in the real world have very little access to research, particularly when it is first published or released. As researchers, we are required to publish, and we publish in discipline-specific journals, which is very important and is read by other researchers who are also working in that discipline. Another medium through which we communicate our work is through conferences, again, often to audiences of researchers who are also in your discipline and interested in your work. So unfortunately, for the others, the practitioners, those who are in industry, this can sound like gobbledygook because we wrap what we're talking about in discipline-specific language that has no application or relevance or meaning or traction to a Year 9 classroom on a Thursday afternoon, or a mining site, or a hospital. The other challenges we face around access is that our industry partners and our educators are incredibly busy people, and they have very limited time to sit down and read a research paper or go and attend a research conference. So time is one of the hardest barriers for us to try and break down, but we do need to think about ways in which we can do that. Our industry partners and our educators also have competing priorities. They have other things to do with their time apart from engaging in research projects. So we need to think about ways we can make research work within those contexts. We need to think about ways we can enhance the value of what research can bring to every unique context in which we would like to see that applied. So ways in which we are doing that here at the Learning Lab is we're thinking about how we can communicate research in ways that are translatable and shareable and actionable in real world contexts. One way in which we can do that is to develop sets of learning principles, which we've done with our PEN principles and our higher education learning framework. And you'll see today a number of our schools who are sharing, yes, this is yours, Canterbury, there's your plug. Some of our schools are taking these principles and turning them into wonderful toolkits, which you'll hear from Terrace, you'll hear from Canterbury, you'll hear from others, and I probably shouldn't have listed anyone because now I'm probably going to leave someone out. Goulburn Valley, there we go, got you in there. So turning them into language, a shared language that they can use within their own context. We're doing this in higher education with our higher education learning framework, and this afternoon you'll hear from Associate Professor Jason Lodge. We're now working on a project to extend this really important work to look at online learning environments. We can also do this by looking at gathering evidence of what good looks like in the real world and building evidence bases in contexts that we haven't explored previously. And you'll hear about that this afternoon with our really exciting mining projects. So central to everything that we are doing to facilitate access and to address context is this notion of having a partnership approach. We need to bring researchers and industry, researchers and practitioners, researchers and educators together to have a conversation about real world learning and training and teaching needs. Our Learning Lab works with our partners to co-construct, to co-design, and to develop a shared understanding of your context, our research, and how it can fit together. We've been looking at the literature around how do you establish high quality partnerships. And the literature tells us that the first and foremost thing is develop an understanding of context. The only way you can do that is through conversations, through building relationships, and that takes time. It also means you've got to include the voices of stakeholders. Get out there and talk to the people to whom you would like this research to have an impact upon. Our research needs to be grounded in real world needs if it's going to have relevance, if it's going to be actionable, if it's going to be sustainable, and if it's going to be scalable. So this means we have to have this ongoing iterative collaboration between research and practice. We take an organised and a systematic approach to the way in which we build this. It takes time, it takes energy, but it is quite planned and meticulous in the way that we go about this. Increasingly, there's recognition that knowledge brokers are an important part of this partnership model. And a knowledge broker is people like myself and my team who sit between research and practice, who build those relationships, who know who to reach out to in terms of understanding what research will be relevant, what implications could be made from that research. And all of this is about building a shared understanding. That is what we are aiming for in our partnership approach. So we have been utilising this model of knowledge mobilisation constructed by Levin back in 2013. And this model originally was designed to better understand how do we mobilise research into educational contexts. But increasingly, I see this model as having power and value for any industry partnership that we engage in. This model has three key domains: knowledge production, knowledge use, and knowledge mediation. Knowledge production is about producing new knowledge. This is normally the domain of our researchers. It's normally the domain of universities. Knowledge use is about taking that research and putting it into real-world contexts in meaningful and sustainable ways. But the part in the middle that is the hardest to understand is knowledge mediation. How do we get traction of this so that we can scale it across our organisations and industries? How do we communicate this knowledge, and who is doing that? And how are we training people to be those mediators of that knowledge long term? But our approach is to build in our partners capacity for them to be the producers of knowledge. We're going to listen to some schools today who have produced new knowledge in their context, and they'll be sharing that with you. Our schools and our industry partners are using knowledge. They're implementing ideas into practice. but we're also working with them to build capability amongst our partners so that they can be the mediators of that knowledge. They can sustain this work beyond the life of us. Not a good business model, I have to say. It makes us redundant, but our relationships are so important, we continue to build upon that year after year. So this takes time. And unfortunately, in many contexts, particularly in education, there's an attraction to the shiny things. We're not particularly shiny. We're there for the long haul. So this sort of partnership approach, it needs to be upfront and clearly understood that this does take a long time. Change of behaviour, change of learning, improvements in a range of learning outcomes takes a long time. So this process recognises that. So we are rewriting this narrative. We're excited about what we've been able to achieve in 18 months. I can't believe that what we've done in 18 months and who we've partnered with in that short period of time. And we as researchers, we have a lot to offer that story, but we can't do it without you. We can't do it without our education and industry partners, because we can only write part of that story. So today it's about you sharing your stories with us and us sharing our stories with you. You're going to hear this morning from some of our amazing researchers from neuroscience, from cognitive psychology, and from education. Between morning tea and lunch, we're hearing from our schools, and we've got schools here today from Melbourne, from Sydney, so Sydney, Melbourne, where's my Melbourne schools? There they are, Melbourne schools up the back, and as well as from Brisbane, and from Shepparton as well. James is from Shepparton. So we've got some wonderful schools here to share their stories of what they've been working on either just this year or for some of our schools for 3 years. And then after lunch, we have our industry stories where I'll be telling you about our exciting partnership with the Resources Training Council. Chase will be telling you about Marta Ed, and Jason about the Higher Education Learning Framework. And then we will wrap up with a panel discussion hosted by Professor Jason Mattingly. So it's a big day. Lock yourselves in, get ready for the ride, and thank you very, very much for joining us today.